The moment Jasmine Crockett leaned forward and said, Marjorie didn't quit because of threats. She quit because of what she saw. The entire narrative around Marjorie Taylor Greene's sudden resignation shifted. Because what Crockett revealed in that interview wasn't just about one congresswoman folding under pressure. It was about what happens when the machine you helped build turns its gears on you, grinding away at the very foundations of loyalty, power, and secrecy that have defined the MAGA era. Before we break down what Jasmine Crockett exposed about the real reason MTG resigned and the chaos tearing apart the Republican conference behind closed doors, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Because this story involves sealed files, backroom panic, whispers of evidence tampering, and the question nobody in GOP leadership wants to answer. What exactly did Marjorie Taylor Greene see that made her quit after just 1 week of pressure? This isn't just politics. It's a thriller unfolding in real time where the stakes are reputations, careers, and perhaps even freedom. The interview happened in one of those generic cable news studios, bright lights casting harsh shadows, the standard backdrop of American flags and network logos, the kind of setup where 1,000 political conversations have happened before, blending into the background noise of the 24/7 news cycle. But the moment Jake Tapper asked Jasmine Crockett about MTG's resignation, you could see something shift in her expression. Not surprise, not satisfaction, but something closer to vindication mixed with genuine concern about what the resignation actually signaled, a crack in the facade of unbreakable Republican unity. Let's talk about what just happened with Marjorie Taylor Greene. Jake opened his tone suggesting he already knew this was going to be significant, his voice measured yet probing. She's resigned from Congress, effective immediately. The official statement cites personal reasons and increased security concerns, but you've been pretty vocal about having your own theories. What do you think really happened here? Crockett took a moment before responding, her eyes steady on the camera. And when she did, her voice carried that careful precision of someone who's thought deeply about what they're about to say, drawing from her own experiences in the crosshairs of political vitriol. Jake, I want to be very clear about something that I think gets lost in all the noise around MTG's resignation. Marjorie Taylor Greene spent years building and feeding a hate machine. She amplified conspiracy theories, from QAnon to election fraud claims. She targeted colleagues, calling them traitors or worse. She ginned up anger and violence and made it her entire political brand, rallying crowds with rhetoric that often skirted the edge of incitement. She leaned forward slightly, her expression intensifying, the studio lights reflecting a fire in her eyes. And then, after 1 week, literally 7 days of Donald Trump turning that same machine on her, she folded. 1 week. Think about that. I've been dealing with death threats, with racist attacks, with people showing up outside my office making threatening gestures for months, plural months, and I'm still here doing my job, fighting for my constituents every single day. But MTG faced 1 week of Trump criticizing her, and she's out? That tells you this isn't really about security threats or personal safety. This is about something else, something deeper and more personal. Jake Tapper pressed, his brow furrowing in that signature way of his. What do you think that something else is? Crockett's response was measured, but pointed, each word chosen like a chess move in a high-stakes game. I think Marjorie Taylor Greene finally realized that the monster she'd been feeding was going to consume her. And I think, and this is where it gets interesting, I think she saw something coming that she didn't want to be part of. Because here's what doesn't add up. Trump went after Thomas Massie, too, labeling him disloyal. He went after Lauren Boebert for similar reasons. He went after several Republicans who signed onto the petition to release the Epstein files. But they're still in Congress. They're still showing up, facing the backlash head-on. They took the heat and kept going. So, why is MTG different? What makes her situation so unique that she had to resign instead of just weathering the storm like her colleagues? The question hung there, suspended in the air like a challenge, and Jake let the silence build before asking the obvious follow-up, his delivery smooth, but insistent. Are you suggesting this has something to do with the Epstein files specifically? Crockett chose her words carefully, aware of the legal and political minefield she was navigating. I'm suggesting that the timing is interesting. MTG was one of the most vocal supporters of releasing those files until suddenly she wasn't. And around the same time she stopped talking about it, leadership started keeping things very tight-lipped about what's actually in those files and what the next phase of the investigation looks like. Democrats on the relevant committees, including people who should have access to this information, are being told there are ongoing developments that can't be discussed yet. That's unusual. That level of secrecy within Congress itself suggests something significant is happening behind the scenes, perhaps new revelations, perhaps legal hurdles, perhaps names that hit too close to home. She paused, then added with a hint of urgency, And look, I'm not saying I know exactly what's in those files or what MTG saw, but I do know that when someone who's made their entire career on being confrontational and aggressive suddenly resigns after years of promising to fight, something fundamental has changed. You don't just walk away from power unless you're either being forced out or you're trying to get ahead of something that's about to hit like a tidal wave of accountability. The interview clip went viral within hours, racking up millions of views across platforms, sparking heated debates in comment sections and late-night talk shows. But it was just the opening salvo, because what Crockett had identified, that disconnect between MTG's resignation and the relatively mild pressure she'd faced compared to others, sparked a wave of investigative reporting into what was actually happening inside the Republican conference. Reporters started pulling together timelines, cross-referencing public statements with private whispers. MTG's last public statement about the Epstein files was on February 12, where she called for complete transparency and promised to fight for the truth, vowing on social media to expose the pedophiles and their enablers. By February 20, she'd gone silent on the issue, her posts shifting to safer topics like border security. On February 27, Trump criticized her publicly for the first time, calling her weak in a Truth Social rant. By March 6, she'd resigned. That's less than a month from vocal advocacy to complete departure. And the Epstein files issue was the thing that changed first, the pivot point in her political trajectory. Then came the leaks, trickling out like water from a dam about to burst. Anonymous Republican staffers started talking to reporters about the atmosphere in GOP conference meetings during that period. One described it to Politico as absolute chaos, with members shouting over each other about who had signed what petition and who was protecting whom from scrutiny. Another told The Hill that MTG went from being Trump's attack dog to being genuinely scared, and it wasn't because of mean tweets or online trolls. Something happened that changed her entire calculation, the source said, hinting at a deeper fear. The most revealing leak came from a source who spoke to the Washington Post on deep background, requesting anonymity due to the sensitivity. According to this staffer, there had been a classified briefing in late February, with attendance limited to select members of the Oversight Committee. New information about the Epstein files had been presented, details that went beyond the already public documents. The source wouldn't specify what that information was, but described the reaction in the room as shocked silence followed by a lot of very urgent conversations about legal exposure and political fallout. MTG had been in that briefing, seated prominently. Within days, her entire demeanor had changed, withdrawn, evasive. She stopped returning calls from MAGA media personalities who wanted her to talk about the Epstein investigation. She started having private meetings with lawyers, sources confirmed. And crucially, she stopped defending Trump on social media and not attacking him, just going completely silent, which for someone as outspoken as MTG was perhaps even more notable than open criticism would have been. Jasmine Crockett addressed these revelations in a follow-up statement that she released through social media rather than traditional press channels, bypassing the filters of mainstream outlets. "We're starting to see the outline of what really happened here," she wrote. MTG didn't resign because Trump sent some mean tweets her way. She resigned because she was in a briefing where she learned something that made her realize her political position had become untenable. And the fact that Republican leadership is working so hard to keep the contents of that briefing secret should tell you everything about how damaging the information must be. She continued, building her case point by point. "Here's what we know for certain. There's an expanding investigation into the Epstein network and who knew what when. There are files that haven't been released to the public and apparently some that haven't even been fully shared with all members of Congress. There are people in positions of power who are very concerned about what's in those files. And there's a Republican congresswoman who went from loudly demanding transparency to suddenly resigning in the span of 3 weeks. Connect the dots. This isn't coincidence, it's consequence." The response from Republican leadership was telling in its defensiveness, a masterclass in evasion. House Speaker Mike Johnson, when asked about Crockett's statement during a press gaggle, said only that Representative Greene's resignation is a personal matter and speculation about closed-door briefings is inappropriate. He refused to confirm or deny whether such a briefing had occurred, his face impassive. When pressed about whether there were new developments in the Epstein files investigation that members should know about, he deflected further, "There are always multiple ongoing investigations, and I'm not going to comment on classified or sensitive matters." That denial was, to many observers, as good as confirmation that something significant had indeed happened in that late February time frame. As one congressional procedure expert told CNN in an exclusive interview, if there truly was nothing to the story, leadership would just say there was no such briefing, or the speculation is baseless. The fact that they're declining to comment while also warning against speculation suggests they're trying to avoid lying while also not revealing information they want kept quiet. It's a tightrope walk, but one that screams cover up. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett kept pressing, refusing to let the momentum fade. In an appearance on MSNBC, she expanded on her theory about what the GOP chaos really signified, her delivery passionate yet controlled. What we're seeing is a party that's eating itself, because the lies and corruption they've been covering up for years are starting to surface in ways they can't control. MTG was never the problem. She was a symptom. The problem is a political movement that's based on loyalty to one person over loyalty to truth or country. And when that starts to crack, when people start realizing that loyalty won't protect them from legal exposure, you get exactly what we're seeing now: panic, resignations, and desperate attempts to control information. The host, leaning in, asked Crockett about her earlier comment regarding what MTG saw that prompted the resignation. Crockett's response revealed even more, peeling back another layer. "Look, I don't have access to all the classified briefings that MTG attended, but I do know that there's been discussion in oversight circles about expanding the Epstein investigation to look at not just his network, but at people who may have helped cover up information after his death. There have been references, vague, but references to interference with evidence, to people gaining access to sensitive materials who shouldn't have had that access. One member mentioned something about henchmen going to Maxwell's cell, which sounds extreme, but suggests there's concern about evidence tampering or destruction." She paused, then added carefully, weighing each syllable, if MTG attended a briefing where she learned that the investigation was expanding into cover-up activities, and if she had any reason to believe she or people she's associated with might be caught up in that expansion, suddenly her resignation makes a lot more sense. You don't stay in Congress where you're subject to investigation, subpoenas, and public scrutiny when you could resign and at least create some distance, perhaps even position yourself for a defense outside the political arena. This theory that MTG's resignation was preemptive, an attempt to get ahead of an expanding investigation, started gaining traction among legal analysts and pundits. Several pointed out that congressional immunity provides certain protections under the speech or debate clause, but it also comes with scrutiny and obligations that a private citizen doesn't face. If MTG believes she might become a subject of interest in an investigation, perhaps due to her past associations or statements, she might have calculated that resignation could actually be a strategic move to limit her exposure, avoiding the ethics committees and potential perjury traps. But Crockett wasn't letting the narrative stay focused solely on MTG, she broadened it to indict the system. In a powerful thread on social media, she reframed the entire situation with sharp clarity. "Everyone's asking why MTG resigned. I think we should be asking why Republican leadership is so desperate to keep the circumstances secret. I think we should be asking what's in those files that's worth this much political chaos. And I think we should be asking who else might be considering resignation once they learn what MTG learned." She continued, her words building like a crescendo, because here's the thing. MTG was one of Trump's most loyal soldiers. She defended him through everything from impeachments to indictments. She amplified every conspiracy, attacked every enemy, carried water for every controversy. If someone that loyal decided she needed to get out, what does that tell you about what she discovered? What information could be so damaging that even Marjorie Taylor Greene said, "I'm done"? Files linking powerful figures? Evidence of obstruction? The truth about who protected Epstein's secrets for so long? The thread went viral, shared tens of thousands of times and prompting responses from across the political spectrum, from fiery defenses to thoughtful agreements. Some conservatives accused Crockett of conspiracy mongering and trying to create scandal where none existed, labeling her comments as partisan attacks. But notably, several conservative commentators who'd previously defended MTG were conspicuously silent, neither defending her nor attacking Crockett's analysis, a silence that spoke volumes in the echo chamber of right-wing media. Then came perhaps the most significant development, adding fuel to the fire. A second Republican member quietly announced they wouldn't be seeking re-election, citing family priorities. Then a third followed suit, with a vague nod to personal reasons. Neither resignation cited the Epstein files or any specific investigation, but the timing, all within 2 weeks of MTG's departure, was hard to ignore. Political observers started wondering if there was a wave of departures happening among Republicans who'd been briefed on sensitive information and decided they wanted out before that information became public, before the subpoenas started flying. Crockett addressed this development in a floor speech that became one of her most widely viewed moments, broadcast live and clipped endlessly on TikTok and Twitter. "We're watching a political party fracture in real time," she said, her voice carrying across the chamber with unyielding force. And it's not fracturing over policy disagreements or strategic differences. It's fracturing because people who have spent years covering for each other are starting to realize that the walls are closing in. They're realizing that loyalty won't protect them from truth. They're realizing that information they thought would stay buried is coming to the surface, unearthed by persistent journalism and legal pressure. She looked directly at the Republican side of the chamber, her gaze piercing. Marjorie Taylor Greene spent years feeding chaos and hate. She emboldened extremists with her words. She targeted colleagues, calling for their expulsion. She made threats and intimidation part of her political brand. And when that same energy turned on her, when she faced just a fraction of what she dished out to others, she couldn't handle it. But I don't think that's really why she quit. I think she quit because she saw what was coming next. Investigations expanding, files being unsealed, questions being asked that she didn't want to answer under oath. The speech resonated particularly powerfully because of the contrast Crockett had drawn in her earlier interview. She'd faced sustained threats, harassment, and attacks for months, racial slurs, doxing, even physical intimidation, while continuing to do her job with resilience. MTG had faced 1 week of criticism and resigned. The implication was clear. Crockett had nothing to hide and nothing to fear from investigations or transparency. MTG apparently did. Her abrupt exit a telltale sign of vulnerability. In a candid conversation with a group of reporters off camera, away from the glare of the lights, Crockett expanded on her thoughts about what MTG's resignation revealed about MAGA politics more broadly. You have to understand the entire movement is built on projection and performance. They accuse others of what they're doing themselves: corruption, election interference, you name it. They perform strength while actually being deeply insecure, hiding behind bluster. And Marjorie was the perfect embodiment of that. All this aggressive posturing, all this talk about being a fighter. But the moment real pressure came, the moment there were actual consequences on the horizon like subpoenas or indictments, she ran. One reporter asked whether Crockett thought Trump had forced MTG out or whether the resignation was truly MTG's decision. Crockett's answer was characteristically thoughtful, reflecting her legal background. I think Trump made her situation impossible, but I don't think he directly forced her resignation. I think what happened is that MTG found herself caught between two impossible positions: stay loyal to Trump and face whatever's coming from the Epstein investigation, or break from Trump and lose her entire political identity in the base. She chose option 3, resign, and try to exit before the real damage hits, perhaps to rebuild elsewhere or avoid testifying. As the story continued to unfold over the following weeks, more pieces of the puzzle emerged, each one adding depth to Crockett's narrative. ProPublica reported that the Department of Justice had quietly expanded its review of Epstein-related materials and was looking into potential obstruction or evidence tampering following Epstein's death in 2019. The Washington Post confirmed that congressional investigators had been briefed on this expansion and that it had sparked concern among members who may have been involved in previous efforts to limit release of certain documents or influence the narrative. Neither report mentioned MTG specifically, but the timeline aligned perfectly with her resignation. She'd been briefed on the expansion, realized the implications for her or her allies, and within 2 weeks had announced she was leaving Congress. And as Crockett had pointed out repeatedly, she was the only one who'd taken that step. Other Republicans who'd been in the same briefings were staying put, presumably because they didn't have the same level of concern about their exposure, or perhaps they were banking on the party's machinery to shield them. In what became her final major statement on the MTG resignation, Crockett appeared on a podcast where she could speak at length without commercial breaks or time constraints, diving deep into the implications. What we witnessed with Marjorie Taylor Greene wasn't just one person resigning. It was a preview of what happens when a political movement based on lies starts to unravel. People who thought they were protected by tribal loyalty are realizing that loyalty doesn't shield you from investigation. People who thought information would stay buried forever are learning that democracy has a way of forcing things into the light eventually, through leaks, lawsuits, or sheer persistence. She continued, her voice gaining momentum. MTG couldn't survive 1 week of pressure because she wasn't built for actual adversity. She was built for performance politics where you attack, but never face real consequences. When real consequences appeared on the horizon, when she realized that her political games had real-world implications that couldn't be tweeted away, she folded. And I think we're going to see more of that. I think there are others who are going to look at what's coming: the investigations, the file releases, the questions they'll have to answer, and decide that resignation is the better option than fighting a losing battle. The host asked one final question: what did Crockett think would ultimately come from the Epstein files investigation? Her answer was both hopeful and cautious, tempered by realism. I think we're going to learn things that powerful people don't want us to know. I think we're going to find out who knew what and when, who helped cover things up, who benefited from keeping information sealed for decades. Will everyone face consequences? Probably not. Powerful people rarely face all the consequences they should, shielded by money and influence. But some will. And the fact that someone as seemingly untouchable as MTG felt she needed to resign tells me that whatever's coming is significant enough that even people who thought they were protected are running scared. She ended with a statement that encapsulated why her analysis of MTG's resignation had resonated so powerfully across divides. Marjorie Taylor Greene wasn't destroyed by Trump. She was destroyed by what was coming next. She saw the future, realized she couldn't outrun it while staying in Congress, and made a choice that should tell all of us that there's more to this story than we know yet. And it should make us demand that whatever information prompted her resignation needs to see the light of day. Because if it's significant enough to end her career, it's significant enough for the American people to know about, to demand accountability, to rebuild trust in our institutions. If this breakdown of what Jasmine Crockett revealed about the real reasons behind MTG's resignation showed you that there's always more to the story than official statements admit, hit that like button and subscribe for more analysis of the political moments that expose what's really happening behind closed doors. Drop a comment telling us what you think really made MTG resign: security concerns like she claimed, or something much bigger that she doesn't want to talk about. And share this with anyone who understands that when powerful people suddenly quit, it's worth asking what they're trying to get ahead of. Your engagement helps us keep asking the questions that need answers, pushing for transparency in an era of shadows.